20 to 25 minutes for questions in English, please, for those of you who would like to ask Dr. Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. When Dr. Borai, Dr. Dina asked me to speak, I said I would love to speak. I would love to speak at Ewart Hall and in Tahrir, and just to share with the community what I know, what I've learned about education. When I hear the introduction, I realize I've been in this for almost 30 years, so it's been a long time. There's been a lot of changes. One of the pieces that brought me to AUC was I work with STEM education and undergraduate engineering education. So a lot of what I'll be talking about stems from a liberal arts foundation, but it also, we have seen it work across engineering, business, and science majors and disciplines also. I do teach in the Graduate School of Education, but I also teach undergraduates. So because of that and the their digital expertise, I'm expanding and using Prezi tonight, so inshallah the technology will work seamlessly. So the title of my talk is Making It Count Beyond the Borders. It's the power of purposeful education for institutional and individual thriving. It's how do universities, or how can universities provide purposeful opportunities, purposeful experiences that lead to positive change on all levels, from the individual to the institution itself, then leading into more social change. And we're talking about beyond the borders of the classroom and thus beyond the borders of the university. So how can purposeful education happen and transformation happen? Transforming and changing education is going to allow for greater institutional and individual stability, which in the long run will help as we go through so many societal changes, and the changes tend to be faster and faster and faster, as we've all experienced here. So how can students thrive and be prepared for a world today? How can they be prepared and become stable within this dynamic, ever-changing world? How can we help our students be successful here? How can we help students be prepared to design or build this? How can students be prepared to solve these issues, whether it's traffic or education or the refugee situation or pollution? How can universities help individuals thrive to be able to share their knowledge in a positive way? So I'll be talking about purposeful, holistic, teaching the entire student education, because what that does is it encourages a lot more outcomes besides just the academic. It encourages diversity, it encourages success, innovation, the ability to multitask, leadership, teamwork, and creativity. But institutions have a responsibility as well as students have a responsibility, and these need to work together. So I'll first begin with the institutional responsibility. Administrative leaders need to rethink conventional organizations of colleges, universities, how disciplines are set up to create a more inventive structure and process. Our companies are doing this, our corporations are doing this, our industries are doing this, and our universities need to start thinking about that. We need to look at universities that integrate not only the academic, not only the curricular, but also the co-curricular, everything that becomes involved with the educational experience, and to offer professional development to staff and administration and opportunities for people across institutional boundaries. So our institutions need to share with each other as well as sharing within the boundaries of the institution. So one of the big institutional responsibilities is helping and assisting students in developing purpose. Arthur Chickering is a renowned and foremost theorist on identity development, focusing especially on 17 to 30-year-olds, so it's a broad range. He has 7 vectors of identity development, and the 6th vector is developing purpose. And developing purpose is where students should be thinking about as they're getting ready to graduate and move on into the corporate and professional world. So there are two mindsets that students have, two sets of expectations of what a university should do to provide these opportunities for them to develop purpose. And the instrumental mindset, this is where the support is shown in career centers. It's the logical step to obtain credentials to get a job. It's where internships are important. It's focusing on trade publications. It's a very realistic, pragmatic approach. It's asking the question, what type of career do I want to have? And so questions in the classroom are framed in a real-life approach, and the main purpose of the university is to take the next step to get a good career, which will help one be financially stable. The other expectation is a holistic mindset. And this is where the university is the place to develop and explore issues, the meaning of life, existential issues. But it's also a place where students can have an opportunity to look for a meaningful vocation, a meaningful calling in their life, and not simply looking for the next career. The support here is from the different faculty, from peers, from different assigned readings, from using different lecturers, campus activities. And the philosophical perspective from this mindset is, what type of person do I want to become? And when that's figured out, what type of job helps to fulfill that person? So of course, you can't just be thinking up in the air of what type of person, the meaning of life, because we still need to eat, we still need to drive our cars, we still need to have a job that is important and that gives us a paycheck. But we also don't want to be in a dead-end job. We want our students to be thriving. We want them to be satisfied with who they are and where they're going and their direction in life. And so balance is necessary for these institutions. So how you do that is you develop the whole student. You show them promising vocational trajectories. Everyone can't graduate and become a high-level manager. There has to be steps there. So the university's responsibility is to show students how to take those steps. One of the most important things that students can learn at a university is resiliency. When you get knocked down, how do you get back up again? And the more practice we have doing that, the stronger we become. So when big things happen, get knocked down, our students know how to get back up again and continue to move forward. It also helps with life satisfaction. Research has shown that students who have been developing their sense of purpose they're less likely to make destructive lifestyle choices, and it also is significant in career development. It might take a little bit longer to get to where a person wants to go, but it's much more stable and goes further with that. So as Alexander Aston says, finding a purpose in life is essential for students' well-being and the ability to answer life's questions. So having this balance allows for students to critically process and reflect their experience. It also heightens their engagement with central academic themes. As a professor, one of the most disappointing phrases I hear is, why do I need to know this? How is this going to help me? That being said, I admit I asked the same questions about algebra. Still waiting on some of those answers. But how is this going to help me? It helps students to bridge the theory, the important research that's happening with their practice, and it helps students clarify their own values, their career goals, and their sense of social responsibility, which is the third step. So Wendell Berry is a noted philosopher and poet laureate, and he writes a lot about universities, and he talks about the purpose of the university. And the underlying idea of a university is the bringing together, it's the combining into one, it's the uni of the versity, combining into one all of the disciplines. And it's the idea that all of these disciplines are necessary for good work and good citizenship, because the purpose of a university is to develop a full human being. It takes a whole university to develop a whole student. So that's a little bit of the university responsibility. But of course, students are the main constituents and stakeholders within a university. So how can students take on responsibility for themselves to thrive? Well, there are 3 areas where students can and should thrive. So there's academic thriving, of course, which is what we think about when we think about a university. But there's also intrapersonal thriving, thriving on becoming the person that you were created to be. And then there's interpersonal thriving, thriving on the relationships, how you relate to the people around your world. And we'll start with academic thriving. This is a cartoon that I like, No Child Left Behind. But is this the test, to test us for the test, to see if we're ready for the test? We've become a global world of standardized tests, and many times that's what we're learning, and that's what we're teaching to for credentials. And this is not the way students will thrive, and this is not what universities need to be doing. So the first one, though, is academic thriving. And there's this idea of advanced engaged learning. And advanced engaged learning is meaningfully processing the materials, making connections with what students already know, and then have experienced, and then having new, open, and interesting learning opportunities for students to be involved in. That could come under community-based learning. It could be experiential learning. A lot of what STEM is doing in Egypt, as we're looking at the grand problems of Egypt and how do we fix those in a multidisciplinary way. So it's being engaged in that. It's also, as a student, practicing academic determination and persistence. It's spending a lot of investment and effort on education. It's not assuming that the professor will feed you things and things get spit back out onto a test, but it's investing your time, your efforts, and your resources. And it's also motivation and intentional pursuit of one's goals. John Bean states that participating in events, participating in classes without committing any psychological energy to them indicates that those classes or those events, experiences are unimportant to the student, and thus they're ineffectual for extended change and in changing the student. Because behavior without thought, just going to class, just having our students check off the boxes, is not likely to lead to the gains that are associated when students are intentionally engaged on campus. So that's academic thriving. The next one is intrapersonal thriving. We talk about this on the university level a little bit. It's talked about some in secondary. But intrapersonal thriving is having a positive perspective. It's helping our students gain a positive perspective, not a naive, everything's beautiful, there's rainbows and flowers growing up everywhere, but it's not expecting everything to turn out okay. It's not overly optimistic, because sometimes that can become the point of arrogance, but it is helping our students to have a broader view and a long-term view of the events that happen to them. So if something happens, if there's a car accident and the person is fine but the car gets wrecked, that's a bad event. We understand that, but that's not one that can crush. How do we help our students move beyond that? If a student fails a test, if a student fails a class, how do we help a student move beyond that? When students are challenged, they need the support to help them move beyond and know that there is a beyond, that the world does not end right here. And that's part of the resiliency that can be taught during this university time. So it's helping students put things into a positive perspective and helping reframe, which is a psychological term of looking at something and trying to find a different way to interpret it, of what it could be. So it's also having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. It's understanding that things can change, can grow, can develop. We are never stuck. And I think for me, one of the most exciting things to see is senior citizens, people in their 70s and 80s, who are coming to workshops and coming to classes because they know that they can learn and they can change. At AUC, we talk a lot about lifelong learning. You never stop learning. And it's important that we help students and universities help students have this growth mindset, and that change is possible. Might take a lot of effort, might take more effort than someone wants, but change is possible. So students that have that positive perspective or that can reframe in positive ways, they keep trying. They keep trying even when the progress is slow, even when the progress is difficult. When I talk with professors and deans in the engineering schools, we talk about this idea that fast does not mean smarter. Just because someone can grab a thermodynamic concept fast doesn't mean that they're smarter than the person who it took a while to figure it out. And so it's that idea that we're not born smart. We are born with resources that we can use and we can learn. And it's that idea of this growth mindset. Even if progress is slow and difficult, it's still progress. It's still moving ahead. And it's helping students remain confident of their ability to keep going until they achieve the final outcome. One of the engineering students that I interviewed, and I used thermodynamics because he took his thermodynamics 2 class 6 times. He is now gainfully employed and very happy, but it was 6 times. But he kept trying. He learned a little bit more, learned a little bit more, learned a little bit more. And so they're persistent. So how do we achieve this? How do we help students achieve this? We equip them with an optimistic way of talking about life. You've probably had colleagues that just were always negative and talking about life in a negative way. Maybe you've had professors that have been that way. Maybe you've had supervisors. It's important, especially on the university level, especially with our first and second year students, that we talk to them in a positive way, that we model that things can change. We are in a country where change is happening all the time. At AUC, we have a new president. We're very excited about our new president. So we talk about it in positive ways and talk about that change in positive ways. It's also helping students to work to envision their success, and it's also helping them to develop and apply their strengths, to understand that we all have unique strengths. How does that work? How do we have our students to develop those? And I would encourage you to think of all that you've learned in your total educational experience. As I tell my students in the class when they get an exam back or a paper back, of course, the first thing they do is look at the grade. And I say, don't look at the grade, look at the feedback. Don't look at your GPA. You know, I tell my students, don't look at that one number, because your university experience encompassed and had a lot more than just that one number. And so when we think about that, that's when we start with our developing of our intrapersonal. But what makes the thriving unique, and how these abilities for students to thrive interpersonally is also what's going to help us with our global change, with our civic engagement. So there's 2 parts to the interpersonal thriving. It's a complex combination. The first part is social connectedness. And this idea of social connectedness is that the research in higher education, studies have found that only one factor consistently predicted the well-being in every country studied for college students, and that's the factor of social relationships. And social connections, personal social connections. So that could be friends, a sense of community within a college environment, relationships with others who will listen. So as we think about healthy relationships, are there specific individuals to whom that student matters? What I tell my students, and again, I work with first-year students and master's students, but I tell them all, find one person on that campus that you connect with who can write you a recommendation. That's a very realistic goal. But also one person, finds a faculty member. Student-faculty interactions are one of the most important measures of student success, and whether a student will persist within their major to the end is having some of these connections. And faculty want these connections too. And these connections are important because it also helps with future networking. It just helps with mentoring. These are subjects that are being looked at more in the Middle East as we look at different university settings and how to enhance and change some of these educational experiences. And again, that moves into connections to trusted others. which develops into an understanding of giving and taking of human relationships. That's just part of, as we mature, we learn that our relationships with others are more of a give and take. We also have a concern for others, and that's part of that give and take. But there also needs to be a sense of community on the campus, and a university is responsible for helping set up this sense of community, that there's a sense of belonging, that students, faculty, staff, and administration know they will be missed if they are not on campus. It's feeling valued by the institution and not just an ID number or not just a tuition check coming in. And it's also being connected to the larger goals of the institution and the larger goals of the class. So a lot of schools now are starting first year and have first year experiences or freshman year experience. And that's part of this orientation to help students understand the culture of the campus, where things are at, how they can be connected. AUC, of course, has a lot of social clubs and a lot of community service clubs and culture clubs. So how can students be connected and have that sense of community? So that's how we nurture a sense of belonging. Encouraging positive interactions with others is important, and not just with peers, but again, with faculty, with staff members. Connecting in meaningful ways. On residential campuses, or campuses where students are living within a residence hall, a lot of that happens there. In commuter campuses, or in campuses where students come in for classes and then leave, this connecting has to happen within the classroom. So part of what my work is, and part of what we do with the Graduate School of Education, is also help faculty understand their responsibility in this thriving. And then, of course, it's working together towards common goals, because a partnership implies that we can accomplish far more by working together than by working individually. And this is part of that faculty-student collaboration. We encourage undergraduate research to partner with a faculty member or to work with graduate students. And so there's a collaboration within specific projects, within entrepreneurial concepts. There's, within theatrical performances, there's lots of ways that students and faculty and administration and staff can work towards common goals. And to quote Arthur Chickering again, close working relationships with others not only provide the emotional support, but also powerfully strengthen educational gains that come from that formal curriculum. But as I said, this interpersonal thriving is a complex combination. And the second part of it is helping our students thrive and understand this concept and this idea of diverse citizenship. And there's places that growing this intercultural maturity. So there has to be an openness to diversity. It's helping our students understand that to be aware of multiple differences. And these differences don't have to be national or cultural differences. They can just be differences with someone who might be in their work group, someone who might be in their club. But it's understanding that there are multiple differences. We're not all alike. We're not all thinking alike. We don't all assume the same outcomes. But then it's also not being threatened by those alternative viewpoints. When I first came to teach here in the graduate school, my first class, I had 14 students from 11 different countries. It spanned the globe, literally, from sub-Saharan Africa to Australia, to North America, to, of course, the Middle East, and to Asia. There was a lot of storming, if you've had business classes, before the norming happened, and understanding when they were working in groups that these differences, there are alternative viewpoints, we have to understand them, and we work together. This helps our students to learn this in the classroom, to learn this in their university experiences will make them that much more successful when they're working in multinational companies and in global corporations, because they'll have already done some of this beginning work. So it's also important that we look at citizenship, not just outside, but also what's around us. And so citizenship of contributing to one's community and committing to making a difference in the world. It's thinking outside of the individual, and that's extremely important. And then we also, how do we do this? So we help students first of all, as a university, we provide these opportunities, and then we help students to deliberately engage in activities that will enhance their citizenship. And that means sustained contact with individuals who are different than you, providing an adequate and safe environment for conflict resolution. This can happen on a faculty level. This can happen if you're a leader of a club in an organization. How do you let some of these conflicts become resolved? And it's also a common goal that requires collaboration across the differences. And so the more students interact with others who are different from themselves, the more they grow cognitively, the more they grow academically, and the more they grow interpersonally. So thriving students are distinguished by how they perceive others who are different. As an occasion for learning, seeking out opportunities to engage with others in a different background or a different perspective on life is extremely important. And what we see is this is a skill that employers are seeking and are hungry for. So you do that, students can do that by having classes or workshops that expose one to a variety of viewpoints in a setting where they can work out this conflict resolution. It's also challenging and stretching our sense of selves along with the intellectual engagement. It's participating in campus events or workshops that promote this interactional diversity. So it's not just learning about the other person, these other viewpoints, but it's actually interacting with people who have these viewpoints. Because it's very important as our world is getting smaller and smaller, as our corporations, as our companies, as our universities get more global, get more diverse. These are characteristics that employers are looking for, and they're looking for experience that our graduates, that university graduates have already had. So just in review, to thrive as a student, there are 5 factors that are necessary for the university to provide and for the student to take a hold of. There has to be engagement in the learning process. It can't just be coming in, hearing a lecture, and then leaving. So that's for the student. As a professor, you can't just come in and give a lecture and leave. There has to be interaction, the concept of experiential education, STEM education, as I said, all of these new pedagogies that are coming out and what the digital world is allowing us to do as faculty members is very important in helping with this engaging in the learning process. And students also have to invest effort in self-regulation of one's learning behaviors. Students have to invest in it, and faculty have to invest in the students. And it's a reciprocal, again, it's a piece of give and take and a balance. We need to help students and universities provide a positive perspective of oneself in the future. There's a tension here, as I mentioned, because it's not everything's happy and having blinders on, but it's helping all of us to know how to reframe and rethink and look at things in a different way. One of the philosophers had said, what makes humans different is we can take something out and we can look at the different facets. We can see it from different viewpoints. It's important that universities help their students to do that. And then it's important for healthy relationships and connecting to others on campus, as well as having an openness to diversity and a desire of making contribution to the lives of others in their world and in their expanded world. So how do we do this? How does one do this? There are 4 components that are important for us to thrive as individuals, for university students to become a thriving individual even before they graduate. And it's seeing the bigger picture, it's choosing mindfully, it's differentiating learning experiences, and reflect, reflect, reflect. So in seeing the bigger picture, maybe it's joining community service activities or participating in some of the opportunities and these co-curricular opportunities that are outside of the classroom. It's also helping students and graduates continue to learn about themselves through career, through personal assessments. Interning in different corporations or NGOs, or interviewing people who are where you think you want to be in a few years. Find out what that's like. Find out if the strengths fit, if it's what you really thought it was like. Befriend an international student or an expat or a foreigner and get to know them better. Travel abroad if there's the opportunity to do that. One that's not listed here is read about different places. Read literature about different countries. Understand what their world is like, even if you can't travel to there. And then, of course, volunteering. As I said, it doesn't have to be in a different country. It can be in a different part of town. It can be working with small children. It can be working with refugees. It can be working with older people. Just volunteer in maybe something that's not quite very comfortable or you've done before. Choosing mindfully, think about the impact of the choices you're making. Think, as I had a professor that used to say, follow the trajectory. If you make this choice today, what does this mean long term? What does this mean down the road? And one of the things in my 25 plus years of working in higher education is helping students understand. They're usually very good at planning out their plan of study. And for any of you that are engineers, your plan of study is already planned out for you. But it's also looking at things outside of the classroom and talking with a trusted person who knows you to plan outside of your classroom experiences as well as your academic experiences and see how they mold together and how they fit together. And to do that mindfully, not just what's next happening. And it's important to differentiate learning experiences. If you're very comfortable to come into a classroom and have the professor lecture and you leave and a student does well on an exam, they tend to tell me, why do I need to do anything different? I've got an A. But again, we're talking about holistic, developing the whole student. And so I encourage them to try a different activity or join a group, or maybe try a different role in a group. If you've always done the same thing and you do it well, try something different. Try something new. We talk a lot, and especially in my graduate classes, about the idea of taking risks and how much we avoid taking risks. But it's very important that we all learn and practice this resiliency. And it's also important that we understand, as we know, no one is perfect, and we can't even try to be perfect. So how do we get knocked down? How do we get back up? How do we take risks and discover some new things about ourselves, about our talents, about our skills, about our abilities? And the final one is reflecting, reflecting, reflecting. This last step is foundational to being successful in the first step. We have a world that moves very, very fast. We have smartphones that move very, very fast. We have people that speak, such as myself, that speak very, very, very fast. But as soon as something is done, we move on to the next one. We move on to the next one. There's been research about this idea of being bored, allowing, especially with young children, allowing young children to be bored, allowing them just to, I used to joke with my children about, did you just sit and stare at a wall all day? And they're like, no, we actually learned something at school. But this just sitting, this thinking, this reflecting, we don't take the time to do it. And so what happens is then we can't choose mindfully what kinds of learning experiences we want to do. We get swept along with whatever is happening, and we find ourselves over here when actually we want it to be over here. And that's what we find with our students too. So reflecting, reflecting, reflecting. It's the only way to know if you, or if you're a leader, if your organization is heading in the direction that you want it to go. There's an easy way to reflect, and this is what I tell my students, this is what I was taught, and it's just continually asking these three simple questions. What? So what? And now what? So what just happened? Or what's going on? And so what does it matter? Why do I care? Why was it important? So an example would be, what just happened? I just gave a midterm. So I will say, one of my students just failed their midterm. What happened? So what? What does this mean? Well, this means that I need to be doing some things differently in this class to get a better grade and to learn more and to do better in the final project. So then the next step is now what? So now what is done for that? So for this student, it might be coming to talk to the professor. But you can think about that also in a professional setting. So what's happening? We have to give this presentation to the president of the corporation. So what? So why does it matter? Well, it matters because our whole team is involved, and the implications or what can happen from this presentation. So now what? Now we decide where we want to see our team and how we're going to do this presentation so everyone gets credit. These are just 3 simple questions that if we just ask them to ourselves in a time of quiet, we can kind of see if we need to recalibrate where we're going. Because for those of you that study math, you know the asymptotes of things where it's going along, it looks like it's the same, but then it starts to split, and you actually want it to be on this track, but you ended up on this track. And so this is where reflection is so important. So how does a university do that with students? We give them space. We give them space and time to think about that. As a faculty member, we give them space in class to do some reflection. And for a lot of universities, we give physical space where students can just gather and talk and reflect. So all that I've talked about today is really going beyond the student learning outcomes. It's going beyond what is done in a classroom. And so by providing opportunities inside and outside of the classroom, purposeful universities will challenge students to examine their own beliefs and their own values. It will challenge students to examine their relationships with the external world, the professional world, their family, their community. And it also will help students use effective but unfamiliar ways of knowledge. What happens, though, is these opportunities, including some of these unique pedagogies or these unique ways of teaching, and activities such as community and civic engagement, they not only are challenging to implement, so we have to understand this is not a simple one step in a week we'll have this done. They're challenging to implement, but lots of times when students come in who are products of traditional learning environments, and a lot depends on the secondary school experience that students have, they find that these different learning experiences aren't exciting, they're not fun, they're very, very challenging, they're very uncomfortable, and they're very difficult. So I learned that as my students now are finishing up in one of their classes on a project where they're producing a 7-minute film using all of the theories and concept that we've been talking about in class. And I had one student who was brave enough to come to me and say, "Can't I write a paper? Please let me write a paper. I know how to write a paper. How many words do you want it to be? I will write the paper." So I'm trying to help this student. We had a good conversation about this idea of taking risks, trying it, seeing what happens. He's a good student. He won't fail the class. So trying this and trying out something new and maybe finding that, 1, there's different ways to learn, and also 2, some different things about himself. But students, and you might be one of them, will find this difficult and would rather not have it. And that's why as universities we need to stretch, we need to challenge while we're providing the support that happens. So, but being challenged to examine personal values and belief structures through the relationship with the external world with effective but maybe unfamiliar ways of teaching, while being provided the appropriate support, one can and most likely will uniquely transform and uniquely be transformed. Marcia Baxter Magolda, in her theory of self-authorship, which was created from a longitudinal study of university students, she started with 100 students in 1985. It's now 2016, and she still has 65 of these same students that she talks to twice a year. She has found that for positive development to occur in the long term, in the lifelong learning, it has to encompass the intra, the interpersonal, and the cognitive. And then that will help us to fully foster, as universities, to fully help foster the development of stable individuals and citizens within this changing world. So in conclusion, education and university education, higher education really must move from thinking inside the box, the way it's done, the way it's been done. Clark Kerr is a historian, higher education university historian, and he talks about how things were done in Oxford and Cambridge. They're still done that same way. 600 years later. So education has to move from thinking inside the box to not outside the box, but to transforming the box. We have to help to create a balance for student thriving that will lead to institutional thriving and impact, and then will give increased and sustainable civic engagement. And we have to do that if we as universities are going to create a positive and lasting change in the world around us. So, everything has locked up a little bit here. Thank you. So, any questions? I know there's a microphone.
Thank you for your presentation. I think that education should prepare students for life, workforce, and citizenship. My question is that through your long teaching experience in Egypt in higher education, do you find that the educational system in Egypt focuses on these disciplines, life, workforce, and citizenship?
Well, I'm learning a lot about the Egyptian educational system because of my colleagues at AUC. So I can say that I have seen a lot of our university students and university-aged students, if they're getting the academic skills within their university, they're moving outside of the university to get these co-curricular skills that are helping them with lifelong learning. I can't speak whether the universities are providing that or not with the public universities, but I know many of our students in the graduate school and in my class teach in some of the private universities, and they talk about even within their classes, they're trying to expand to this idea of lifelong learning. But I've also, like I said, I've seen and worked, especially as Dean of Students, we had many students from the different universities come and avail themselves and put themselves in situations, whether it's working with NGOs or volunteering, to use their expertise to help and become more civically engaged. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this presentation. So for me, I'm a student. I'm a pharmacy student. We are working in the extracurriculum activities, the student activities in our universities. So we are trying very hard to gain the experience that we are not getting in the university through the student activities. So how can the student activity or the NGOs give us the experience, or how can we cooperate with the education system in Egypt to improve the education and to invest in the students?
That's a great question. That's the million-dollar question that as an entrepreneur, if we could find someone who could fix this. Part of it is finding NGOs that are willing. And most of them are started by people, or a lot of the NGOs have been started by people who have not been out of university more than 10 or 15 years. What I've seen with some of our graduates is they find someone in an NGO, in a business that's serving, has corporate social responsibility, and they're finding a mentor who's willing to help them and advise them in taking some of these next steps. So that's part of when I talked about choosing mindfully. It's seeing what's around and what's being taught in the classroom, and then how can that serving happen? How can that engagement happen outside? And finding NGOs who are really willing to mentor. And that's a piece that some of our students and some of my faculty colleagues have been working on, building this idea of mentoring outside of the university borders to keep this learning happening, especially for young college graduates and university graduates.
So we as a students recently we are thinking how to change the education system through the student activity. So we were thinking to approach the schools to to put the right values or the right educational values in the students, as you've mentioned, to think positive and to not only focus on the grades as if it's the only determination for their success, but to look also for the future and that there is an opportunities. But does it help if we put these ideas or the right values in the schools, but with the wrong education? Does it help?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last part?
Okay. They are learning with the wrong education system.
Right.
They have to memorize the words or the phrases and put them on the exam. But does it help to put the right values or the education values in them with the wrong education system?
Okay, I get it now, thank you. And I would say it's not a wrong educational system, we call it the traditional system, because there are people that have done very well with that system for 600 plus years. But I think part of what we're doing, and I know there's organizations here, are trying to help with taking the traditional system and expanding it, and having these new pedagogies and ways of thinking. Because what happens and what we saw in the US is this whole concept of memorization was seen as bad, so they threw it completely out. That's not good either. It's important. I want my doctor to know from memory, and I want my pharmacist to know from memory what medicines work together and what don't. I don't want them to have to look up every time. But it's also finding different and creative ways of thinking about things. And so it's doing some of the assessments, not as just in tests. I think it's important. This is a cultural shift. This is a cultural shift and a cultural change in education, not just here in Egypt, but globally, that to shift the culture is like taking a huge ocean liner and trying to turn it. So while we want it to turn fast like a motorcycle, it's taking its time. I would encourage as students to find, and as students, and those of you that are students, you know who the professors are who might be open to trying something a little bit different, who might be open to trying something new, and meeting with them. As I tell my students at AUC, and not going in and saying, you're doing this wrong, this is the right way, because that never works, but going in to say, please help me understand why you're teaching it this way when we have seen that it can work this way. Can we try this? So I think it's important. These ABET, if you're familiar with the accreditation board for engineering, talks about the technical skills and talks about the professional skills. The technical skills can be memorized, but what we're needing and what we're finding with engineers, and especially those in the sciences, is we need these professional skills of communication, of being able to relate to people outside of themselves. So that's another way as students to bring it to your university and faculty and say, we need the balance of these, of these skills to be successful.
Hello.
Hi.
I'd like to thank you so much for these concepts you were talking about. I really admire these concepts, and I am a master researcher in Chickering University, and I really want to apply these concepts in my university, and I don't know how. So, the means. What should I do? The steps I should do to apply these concepts in my university.
When I talk with students, and that's a very noble, thank you, that's a very noble cause, and I know we're talking about it in the back too. And it's a noble cause to apply these concepts to the university at large. I always challenge students to apply it to yourselves first, to apply it as an individual. What things are you doing to thrive cognitively? What things are you doing to show that you're invested in your education? What things are you doing to show that you're invested in your career and knowing more about yourself? And this isn't done, it's done on an individual basis, but it's done with groups of students. And then that's a much more powerful voice to go and say, look at what we've done, you know, whether it's within a class or within a department or within a faculty, and say, look what we've done in the Faculty of Commerce, look what we've done in the Faculty of Business. You know, we started small, but look, we are the students everybody wants to have in their classes. This is why. So again, it's cultural change. It's very, very small. And we're also talking about, as I said, not bad pedagogy, not bad ways of teaching, but traditional, the way it's always been done, the way that seems to work, even though we know that there's better ways. And so it's starting as an individual. It's starting with some of these concepts of differentiating the learning experience and being mindful and you know, and like I said, get people next to you and then get bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's how you're going to have the impact on your institution. Because after being in higher education for many, many years, I've been in small liberal arts schools, large Research One universities, medium-sized schools. Lots of times the administration say, we're not worried about these students, they're graduating anyway. You know, so as a student development person, it's like, no, we have to worry about them. But what I've seen is individual students, and students have, while it might not seem like it, students do have the most powerful voice on campus. And so it's important to use that voice appropriately.
Good evening, Doctor. First of all, welcome Egypt. I just want to thank you for your great lecture, although I didn't attend the lecture from the beginning, so I am unlucky person indeed. You said that you know a lot about the educational system in Egypt. So I'm sure that you know what are the difficulties that we face as teachers in Egypt and the difficulties in schools. You know that, don't you agree with me that if we want to have a kind of education beyond borders, as you said, that we have to change the way of thinking of teachers if you want to have a good educational system in Egypt?
Well, actually what I said is I'm learning more about the educational system in Egypt. I'm learning quite a bit. And I would say, yes, we have to change things for teachers, but not just in Egypt. We need to change it globally. I think Finland is the only country that treats its teachers the way they should be, in my opinion, treated. Teachers are second class. They're second class in the US. They're second class here. That's part of this cultural change. We have to be a world, and we're not. Like I said, I think there's one country, maybe Sweden is another, but Finland is the one that's always held up for how teachers are educated and treated and where it goes in the disciplines. And that's part of this thriving, that's part of this concept of the university, the UNI, uni. It's unified, it's bringing together all of the disciplines, not having the hierarchy of disciplines. You know, I've been in STEM, I've been in engineering, and that's one of the hierarchy of disciplines, and that's the way our world is. I'm not sure how to change that, but I do know that there's a lot of professional development opportunities that are expanding and increasing for the teachers here in Egypt. I know some of our Middle East Institute of Higher Education out of AUC, Dr. Malik Zalouk, she's been doing quite a bit with expanding and working with faculties of education to help teachers and help the system. And you know, it's grassroots, and that's where we need to start. And I would love to see some of what she's doing move over to the US and help some of that happening too. And it's the responsibility of the teachers, if possible, to take the opportunities that are provided and step up with those.
I would like to thank you for your presentation. Actually, I'm interested to know how we could do assessment not through the standardized tests, especially that I know that those tests, they have like measurement error and they are not including some variables, but how we can do assessment without them? Like, do you mean like qualitatively, or just you mean like we can like include like quantitative measures rather than the standardized test? Thank you.
And thank you for that question. Let me clarify, are you talking like standardized tests in the larger system or standardized tests within a classroom?
I mean like the TEMS, PEARLS, those standardized tests, those international standardized tests that I'm talking about.
Yes. It's interesting because, of course, you know, there's the Senawayama here, we have the SATs, the ACTs, there's the ISGCEs. That is something that is not my area of expertise. I can speak of how a lot of universities now in the US and in Canada, but especially in the US, are dropping their standardized test requirements for admission, and they're looking at students incoming in a more holistic way. And these are some of our Ivy League, you know, very selective colleges. So they're doing interviews, they're looking at the GPAs and the classes that the students took and their extracurricular activities and all of that. I think if someone could create the perfect standardized test, they would be rich. But I'm not, you know, there, again, it's traditional across the globe, and there's a place for it, but I think some of the difficulties happens when the weight of it tends to be more than maybe what it should. But that's some other people, that's their area of expertise, and I'm learning a lot from their research.
Thank you very much. Thank you for attending, and I'm sure the lecture was very interesting. And on your behalf, thank you, Dr. Jennifer, for today's lecture, and have a good night.
This is my contact information. If you're interested, please feel free to email, and it's also the information for our graduate school. So thank you very much.